Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you. My name is Adil Raja. I'm an investigative journalist. In a previous life, I was a military officer. I've served 21 years in the Pakistani military, and I retired, took voluntary retirement as a major, and became a dissident journalist, which cost me a lot. I became a parahasiast, as they call it. A parahasiast is someone who speaks truth to power, and there's a cost to be paid, and I am paying that cost. So far, just because of practicing journalism, I have been court-martialed in absentia. I've been given 2 life sentences in Pakistan, and my cumulative sentence is 99 years of rigorous imprisonment by the Pakistani state, which is an authoritarian state, mind you, and it is on record. And the only reason, while staying in the UK, I am being punished and I am being targeted through transnational repression is because I'm exposing the fascist regime in Pakistan, and I am supporting democracy in Pakistan. I'm supporting 85% population of Pakistan who voted for the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who's currently in jail. So that is my brief introduction. And today we've got, definitely I'm the host, or I'm not the host, I'm the guest over here, Tony Gosling. He does not need an introduction, but Tony is going to ask me some questions, and he's going to host the show today. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks very much, Adil. And you're still smiling after all this, which is such an important thing, because there is an attempt, I think, through psychological means to break the Pakistani spirit, and through the imprisonment of Imran Khan. And I think the only way to do this is to poke fun at these chiefs who think they're in charge of a country which actually isn't really behind them. And let's start because we're going to go on a bit of a deep look into the China-US relations, since we've had these interesting visits with both Putin and Donald Trump getting down, maybe even on one knee, to the great Chinese emperor over the last couple of weeks. But let's start with Asim Munir, who's now rumored to be heading over to Iran to really take a big role, apparently, in trying to negotiate between the Iranian leadership and the US leadership. What's really going on here?
Yeah, so let's be very clear, Tony. Asim Munir, the favorite field marshal of the man despised by most of the world now because of the cost of the living crisis. Of course, I'm talking about President Donald J. Trump. Well, if he's his favorite field marshal, well, he's nobody's favorite in the world then. But, having said that, yes, he is playing a very important role as a glorified postman, as a glorified messenger of President Trump. And President Trump has always, he campaigned on the basis of peace, not war, especially with regards to Iran. He said that I'm a deal maker. I'm not going to wage a war in Iran, and I don't want your children to die in a war with Iran. And I'm going to reduce the cost of living. Well, 2.5 years into his presidency, he has done exactly opposite that. And he's going into a midterm. So he's desperate enough to bank on a dictator like Asim Munir to get him a deal which would provide a face-saving narrative to him. That's what I believe. And that is why Asim Munir is now, again, his brother-in-law, who's the Interior Minister of Pakistan, who incidentally came to the UK to ask for my extradition as well. He went to Iran first, and now Asim Munir is going to Iran. He should be landing there shortly. And the deal is almost done, but it is stuck. I mean, there are two major factors as per my information, as per my sources. They claim that firstly, Iran wants the damages to be paid, and for that, President Trump is willing to share a revenue from the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, if you're paying $1 per barrel, it comes to roughly around $2 million per ship. And if the revenue is collected from the ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, much like the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal. Well, that revenue could be shared between the US and Iran. That is where the money question is, and the final, I mean, there are only some. I believe it just needs to be formalized. But the main question is that the US and Israel went to war against Iran, saying that the defense secretary or the secretary of war of the US, Pete Hegseth, has been repeatedly saying that would you have accepted Iran having nuclear weapons? So they went and attacked Iran on the narrative, on the pretext that, listen, Iran has got nuclear weapons. But, Iran has got enriched uranium, 60% enriched uranium, which can be converted into nuclear warhead. So the main bone of contention is that Iran gives up that enriched uranium and to a third party, and they keep it for a period of 15 years. And in this case,
just to be clear, surely they have to do further enrichment on that uranium in order for it to be usable in a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, of course, that is one issue.
It's not enough. And actually, it was Tulsi Gabbard that said that at the time, this is a couple of years ago now, there was no intention to build a nuclear weapon. So this is really just a kind of a paranoid story that's been cooked up in order to create an excuse for a conflict.
As I said, it is what Asim Munir, as a glorified postman, is doing for Trump is to give him a face-saving narrative for him to go into the midterm elections that, listen, I know the art of deal, and I've made a deal, and now Iran won't have nuclear weapons because they've given up their enriched uranium, and Pakistan is offering to host that uranium and to keep that uranium, which will remain the property of the Iranian government. But the Iran definitely wants some guarantors, and Pakistan, as per my information, is offering that Iran can keep 2 guarantors, maybe Russia, maybe China, and the US can also have 2 guarantors who can inspect the uranium at any time in Pakistan, and that could be maybe Saudi Arabia or even either Qatar or the UAE. So that is supposedly, allegedly going to be a face-saving narrative for President Trump for as an election gimmick for him. Whereas the fact of the matter is, Tony, please don't mind me saying, because I'm paying my bills here in the UK because of this ridiculous war started in Iran by the President Trump, and of course he agreed to Netanyahu to have started this war for whatever reasons. I mean, people say allegedly that it was the Epstein files because of which it all started, and there's as the story goes. But I'm paying the price for this war. First, the price of Ukraine war, which was required to be paid, fine, but this war was not required. Why did you go ahead and kill those children in Iran? Why did you have to do all that? And why did you have to create a massive cost of living crisis for the world? And I'm not for this war.
Let me answer that, because it looks now, with the information that's available, not on the mainstream press, of course, is that Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner had convinced Donald Trump that due to the uprisings in January, that just a few little American bombs in Iran, and then that would actually overturn the entire country. He would get a nice, easy regime change. And I wonder whether the relationships has cooled a bit now between Kushner and Trump, since this whole thing has been proved to be utter nonsense. But anyway, a part of all of this with Munir's visit to Iran is this amazing cable. Is it I0678 has just been released, the actual original of this Pakistani cipher, which proves that there has been an immense amount of control of Pakistan, and that this Pakistani military government is just doing the United States bidding. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that. That's only just been revealed.
Yeah, no, Tony, the cipher was revealed in 2022, 2023 by Imran Khan himself. He did not show the actual cipher,
No.
but he made these claims, and he showed a paper
Yeah.
at a massive gathering of millions of people in Islamabad after the regime change against him, even a bit before that. Listen, the American wants me gone because I am not taking their dictation, and we've got evidence of it. And people have been talking about it for 3 years now, that there is this cipher, which you can see on the screen right now, of course, if you're watching the video on Soldier Speaks. Listen, the issue is that the cipher was always there. Americans have always been notoriously, conducting regime change around the world. Anyone who does not listen to them...
We've got the document. We've got the actual document itself.
Yeah, now we've got the actual document, and usually it takes 30 years for these regime change to be exposed. But in this case, it only took 3 years for the evidence of the American interference coming up. But the bigger problem is that it was the Pakistani military which helped the Americans to overthrow democratically elected leader, and then they allegedly rigged the entire election in 2024. As per the Commonwealth report, there were serious irregularities in the election, and the Commonwealth report was, it was snubbed. It was not being released. It was being hidden until a whistleblower like me came forward, and he exposed the Commonwealth election monitoring report. And irrespective of that, the European Union is being blackmailed by the Pakistani military, since the Pakistani military is providing ammunition to the Ukraine war, and Ukrainians are using the vintage American arms, and making the ammunition for that vintage arm is not very profitable for the Americans or for the Western military industrial complex. So that's why the Pakistanis, who also have those weapons in service, are making the ammunition for those weapons. So they're providing ammunition at a great cost to the Ukrainians. So I believe that is why the European Union is being blackmailed into staying silent and not releasing the European Union Election Observation Mission report for the 2024 election. So obviously there is a global conspiracy to not allow a democratic elected leadership in Pakistan to take power, because that democratic elected leadership is being spearheaded by Imran Khan, and Imran Khan says absolutely not to the shenanigans of this so-called Western military industrial complex, which wants to wage a war against China and the new Cold War, and make Pakistan the center stage of that war. And as a result of the war, for example, the original Cold War between USSR and USA was again fought in Pakistan. Pakistan was the frontline state, and Pakistan, conducted the Afghan Jihad, and the result was the so-called Kalashnikov and heroin culture in Pakistan. Pakistani people suffered because of that Cold War. And now, the new Cold War, the Pakistani elite, they make money, they enjoy themselves, the entire country is working for them, but the 250 million people of Pakistan, they're suffering immensely, and they're the one who are coming and becoming refugees. They're coming here to the UK, and they're, if 100 people, for example, they take a journey from Pakistan to Europe, only 20 out of them will make it to Europe alive, or to the UK alive. Just imagine. And there's so many cases in which they die in this journey. Why are they making this journey? They're economic migrants. But why are they economic migrants? Because of this interference with the Pakistani political system, in which democracy is not allowed to prevail in the country. While Imran Khan was the prime minister up till from 2018 to 2022, the country's economy was growing at the GDP rate of 6%. All of that was destroyed.
Yeah.
Why? Because Imran Khan was looking after the people of his country, not looking after the Western interest.
He did a fantastic speech in 2017, I think 2018, I think it was. He did that fantastic speech at the United Nations, where he started talking about the RSS, one of the first times that many people in the world had ever heard about this organization, which was an Indian group, Indian extremist Hindu nationalist, basically a kind of private army that's being trained in India. Even though it's under the guise of it's kind of like the Scouts or whatever for young people, actually it's a very sinister organization. But anyway, look, Imran Khan, can you just give us an update on what's happened? Because it's obviously it's other members of his family too that have been targeted by the Pakistani military.
Yeah, obviously his nephews and his sisters are not allowed to leave the country. Who are there? Their children are not allowed to leave the country. Imran Khan's own sons, Qasim and Suleiman, they're not allowed to come to Pakistan and meet their father. So, since you're asking about the family is not allowed to meet Imran Khan. It's been, he's been kept in solidarity confinement for almost 5 to 6 months now. Because they are so scared that his message is his tweets are keeping the movement alive. Movement for democracy alive in Pakistan, and it is shameless of the U.S. administration, Trump administration, and the U.S. establishment and the Western establishment, which prefers to put a blind eye towards this kind of authoritarian and fascist attitude of the Pakistani military.
But
and
how is he in prison? How's he getting on? Is it his health?
His health is suffering, definitely. He's lost 85% eyesight is one of his eye, and there are various allegations why that is happening, because there are various allegations of blood clots being formed in his blood, and various allegations of bacterial infections, which has been he's suffering, and he's not being allowed hospital admission and hospital treatment. So there are all this, it is all in the grave, because he's not being allowed, hospitalization and proper treatment. So that is also there, because the military-led regime in Pakistan of Sharifs, they would prefer Imran Khan to, God forbid, die in jail, so that they and their children can rule over Pakistan, a country which we now believe was maybe made only for this elite capture, for the elites and for the poor to serve them. Because it seems like that in Pakistan, in a country of 250 million, the country has always served the interest of the elite, who are aligned with the US since beginning, who are aligned with the Western interest. And as far as India and the partition was between India and Pakistan, right? So in India, the Prime Minister Nehru in the beginning created a certain constitutional boundaries so that the Indian military could not take over the governance, and the Indian economy works for their middle class. They've got a growing middle class, and Pakistan on partition was in two wings, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. So East Pakistan, the Bengalis, they could see that what is actually going on in Pakistan, the elite is capturing not only West Pakistan but also East Pakistan. So there was a popular uprising against West Pakistan, against the Punjabi-dominated West Pakistan, and they created Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is doing much better even than Pakistan, and they were created in 1971. So just tell me, Tony, then why would anybody feel any kind of a positive affiliation? I'm a third-generation Pakistan Army officer, but if I can see that, and if I start exposing all this, they come after me and they come after all the dissidents with all their force. And it's very disheartening to say that they've got influence here in the UK, in the US, the Pakistani origin MPs sitting in the parliament, especially in the Labour Party.
Well, look, let me tell you, there were Nazi influence MPs in the House of Commons after the Second World War too, because an old friend of mine, Harry Beckhoff, who was doing denazification, he discovered several Nazis who were running Cologne University right after the war. And when he reported them and asked that they be removed from their jobs, this is I think it was in the British sector anyway, there were questions about him in the House of Commons. These MPs were saying, who is this guy, Harry Beckhoff? He's trying to remove these people. They're not Nazis at all. Actually, they were, and they were eventually removed by the army. But that's because there is influence in politics by these people who shouldn't be there. But in a way, getting back to Iran and Munir, this seems like a kind of pantomime going on here. With the evidence that we've seen about the US influence, surely by sending their friend, the Pakistan army chief, to Iran, the Americans are kind of negotiating with themselves.
Yeah, that's true, because I was told by sources in Iran, certain journalists, that once the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi went to Moscow, he was told by the Russians that, listen, you are negotiating with Pakistan, thinking that they might be neutral arbitrators, but they're not. They are the poster child and glorious postman for the Americans. So you can't really trust them. That is there, obviously. So it is not the Iranians. Most definitely, they do not trust Asim Munir or the Pakistani regime. They know what's actually at play. So that's why they're asking for international guarantors like China and Russia. But mind you, Tony, whatsoever is happening in Iran, the Iranian resistance is based on Chinese support. Chinese support has enabled Iran to sustain their ballistic missiles arsenal at the rate of, still after all the destruction by the US bombing and the Israeli bombing, they're still maintaining, as per American intelligence estimates, 70% of their missile arsenal is still intact, and 80% of their drone fleet is still intact. Reason is because there have been shipments from China to Iran, which has given them replenishment and which has given them logistic support. But Chinese are playing very smart. They are not at the forefront. They've got influence over Pakistan as well, over Islamabad and Rawalpindi as well, because Pakistani military gets 80% of their military hardware from the Chinese. So the Chinese have got leverage over Pakistan as well, and they've got an investment of $60 billion in the One Belt and Road Initiative in Iran, and they are practically supporting Iran, because the way Iran has defied the US and Israel, and the way they have reacted, and the way President Trump was saying that I'm going to finish the war in one day, in 24 hours, it'll be all done and dusted with. Well, no, sir. We are facing a cost of living crisis around the world, especially here in the Europe, So he was not able to deliver, because the Iranians fought back, and Iranians were able to fight back because of the silent Chinese support, material Chinese support. So China are the actual, I would say, power brokers. That's not the kingmakers is the right word in this context. Chinese in Asia are the real kingmakers, because they consider Iran and they consider West Asia to be their own backyard, which practically is.
Well, it is. And this is a paradox with Pakistan, isn't it? So you've got a lot of connections with the Chinese military hardware in Pakistan, and yet the Americans seem to be in charge of the military government. So how does that play out?
There is a history of institutional, influence of, Pakistan came into being in 1947, and soon after the founding father of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he was killed, and he was not provided with an air ambulance by, allegedly military interference. He was otherwise, in a very bad shape, but he could have survived a few more years. But he was not allowed to live, and a military dictator and another field marshal, Ayub Khan, took over power by the US support and by the UK's support. He came here to London, and the Queen herself, gave her royal reception. And then he went to the US, and he was given, state level reception, and he became a darling of the Western Alliance post Second World War. And he, initiated an institutional influence of the US and the US-led Western camp over Pakistan. So there is this institutional history to the American influence over the Pakistani military, which actually rules the country from behind the shadows, overtly 70% of the time, and covertly 30% of the time. It is still ruling. So in the era of Zia-ul-Haq, there was a Cold War going on. So the Americans were again involved, it has been detailed in Charlie Wilson's War, if you've read the book or if you've watched the movie. So there was a lot of money coming in. And then later on, during Musharraf era, there was global war on terror going on. So again, there on the name of the Coalition Support Fund, the Pakistani military were making billions of dollars. Some say that roughly around 40 billion US dollar were made. So the Pakistani military has benefited from this relationship. Not necessarily the Pakistani public, but the Pakistani military has. So there is this institutional, reliance on the Western money coming in, but it's not coming in anymore, mind you. Now the Chinese are the paymasters, so they have to listen to the Chinese. But having said that, there are historical connections, human-to-human connections, and the financial connections between the Pakistani military elite and the Pakistani political elite with the US-led Western camp still exist, and then that is a very, that balancing act which Pakistan has to play, because Henry Kissinger came to Pakistan and he went to China to initiate diplomatic relationship with the Chinese, and Pakistani played a role over there. So Pakistanis have, in fact, successfully so far played the role of a bridge between the US-led Western world and China, but that bridge is no more there because China and US now negotiate directly, and Pakistan is nowhere on the scene, but they are desperate to stay relevant. And once
Sorry, I'm wondering, why would the Chinese give some of its best weapons to Pakistan? Not give, obviously, sell, right? In the knowledge that the American military it may came over to Pakistan, have a good old look at everything, pull it all apart. Surely the Chinese are a little bit nervous when they're selling some of the best weaponry to the Pakistani military.
Not really, Johnny. Chinese development of their military-industrial complex depended initially on the Pakistanis, who were given the latest American weapons, like the F-16 fighter aircraft were given to them by the Americans. All the latest American technology came to Pakistan as a result of the institutional relationship between the Pakistani military and the US deep state. So Pakistanis have been sharing that technology secrets with the Chinese, who have been, reverse engineering most of the equipment, for example, and they've been delivering it to Pakistan after Pakistan faced sanctions because of the proxies or because of the alleged support to terrorism in the country by the Pakistani military. There were certain sanctions on Pakistan, and once they went nuclear as a response to the Indian nuclear, nuclear weapons development. So there were certain sanctions on Pakistan. There were Pressler amendments which brought in the sanctions on Pakistan. So as a result, Pakistan was forced to rely on the Chinese and allow access to the American military technology to the Chinese, who reverse engineered a lot of stuff. And during the global war on terror, mind you, there were certain missiles which fell in Pakistan unexploded, and those missiles were shared. There were Tomahawk missiles which were shared with the Chinese, and they successfully reverse engineered it. And of course, they've got their own R&D going on as well. But China believes in winning wars without fighting. Right? That's the art of war, on which Chinese, entire geopolitical strategy modern Chinese strategy is based upon. So, Sun Tzu's art of war, if that is the basis, so Chinese need a laboratory for their weapon development, and Pakistan effectively became that laboratory for them, in which they've developed the JF-17 fighters, and they're buying their Chinese missiles. They're not developing it; the Chinese are selling it to them. And then they bought the J-10C, the Dragons. This is again a fighter aircraft, and they deployed it against India in confrontations. The recent confrontation was last year, and some of them, like last year, President Trump is very fond of saying that Indians lost 10 planes and they have lost 7 planes, and the French Rafales were brought down by the Chinese equipment, the Chinese J-10C. So not only the Chinese are, proving their weapons to be superior than that of maybe French weapons, because it was the Chinese PL-15 missiles which were used to bring down the French Rafale aircraft and held by Indian Air Force. So Not only that, but also the Chinese technology is of radio jamming and radar jamming capabilities, electronic countermeasures being provided to Pakistan are being deployed by the Pakistani military against India, telling the world that the Chinese are now ready to become a major defense industrial complex, and they are willing to sell their. No, Chinese are. It is the Chinese weaponry which is being sold now effectively around the world. It is the Chinese aircraft which is being sold now around the world, and Pakistan are the testing grounds for that kind of weaponry. And Pakistan is buying this technology, and Pakistan is paying the price to giving, the Pakistan's rare earth element and Pakistan's gold, for example, and Pakistan's copper, for example, to Chinese at favorable rates. Pakistan is Pakistan holds treasures of rare earth elements, and the Chinese holds a monopoly of processing those treasures. And most of the rare earth elements in Pakistan are being processed, extracted, and processed by the Chinese. They take the raw material, just like the Avatar movie, to China, processes over there. For example, if they're taking copper for the last 50 years from the Sandak minefield in Balochistan, they're taking the copper ore to China, they're shipping it to China, and they're processing it over there. And in copper ore, you find gold as well. But Pakistanis do not have any oversight over the processing, and it is the Chinese who tell them that, well, we took this much ore, and this much is what we got out of it, and this is your share. But actually,
what you're saying
here,
China is sounding like the big emperors. Is where we started with this whole idea of Donald Trump going to visit President Xi, and then Putin going to visit President Xi. It would be interesting to be a fly on the wall in those conversations. But the thing with China is now they are sort of becoming a very much rising world power, particularly watching Trump make these mistakes that he's being tricked into by Netanyahu's friends. The Americans getting more and more desperate, it seems, to cling on to a dying empire, which they pinched from the British, or the British handed over to them at the end of the Second World War, much of it anyway. But the trouble with China is it's actually very, very controlled. We've now got a life president who was never actually elected at all. President Xi, he first came to prominence that most commentators would ever have come across him as being involved in the management of the Beijing Olympic Games. And he did apparently very good job there, and so they decided, right, if he can run an Olympic Games, then let him run the country. But the trouble is that there is no dissent allowed at all in China. In fact, even if you refuse to sing the national anthem and don't respect the Chinese flag, that's it. You're banged up in prison. So there's this lack of freedom of speech, this lack of discussion amongst the population. Well, it's okay so long as your population is happy and successful and and finding it. The young people are finding it easy to make a living, to get a family going, with 2 children now. But the trouble is there is no dissent allowed actually in China, and under the surface it's quite sinister. I wonder what you make of this rising empire from a Pakistani point of view.
Well, I'll give you a global perspective and a Pakistani point of view as well, because China and Pakistan are quite close, and I've been studying that relationship, and I've been studying the Chinese influence around the world as well, and I've been writing about it. But before I go there, you're very right in saying that President Xi is acting like an emperor. He is a princeling himself. Once I say princeling, his father was from the Chinese elite, and he himself is one of the Chinese elite. And of course, there is no democracy in China, and there is no freedom of speech in China. But the system works for them. How it works for them, I'll let you know. But it is an authoritarian regime. But my complaint, Tony, as I was talking to you earlier before, once we met in London, my complaint still, stands that President Trump, the way he's conducted himself, and the way he's been supported by the American right, and the way he's projected his power around the world, he is making even the Chinese regime look good, and he has damaged the free world, if there was one such world, but at least there was freedom of speech, and he has drastically damaged the entire reputation of the so-called free world, and he's making the Chinese look good. Now, having said that, coming over to the Chinese model, Tony, the Chinese model is actually if you read it, it is China uses business as a geopolitical weapon and geopolitics as protection for the business. It's very simple. What they do is that they go for the trade first, then it is followed by influence, and then lastly comes the control part. China's strategy blends is that it depends upon their economic expansion through infrastructure development, trade, loans.
Yeah, and this is exactly how the British Empire used to operate. It began with trade. In fact, it penetrated China through this exact method. A bit of warfare. Let's take over the island of Hong Kong and we'll trade with these guys. And then bit by bit, the British were infiltrating.
That's true. So they've learned from the best in it. After we met last week, we went to Sabine's former university, because since we were meeting in Holborn, we went to the London School of Economics, which is Sabine said that has changed completely almost. And most of the students which we found over there, since we could see from the glasses windows of the university, LSE, were Chinese. So they're studying in the American universities, right? So they've learned from the best.
It's the same here in Bristol. Many, many Chinese students everywhere.
Yeah. So, Tony, the Belt and Road Initiative, what is it? Right? That is the economic expansion plan of the Chinese. That is what the British did in the colonies they made. They created the railway lines. So the Chinese is again doing the same thing. They are creating this Belt and Road Initiative, and they are creating a dependency. All right. They're making countries reliant on Chinese investment and supply chains and markets. This is the modern world we are talking about. And of course, they're involved in non-interference diplomacy. China avoids lecturing states on democracy or human rights, making it attractive to authoritarian and developing countries like Pakistan, right? And then the long-term geopolitics, then it is focused on the ports, like the port of Gwadar in Pakistan. All right, it is then focused on rare earth minerals. They go for it, they grab it in Africa and Pakistan, for example. All right, then it is based on technology, shipping routes, and strategic access rather than immediate military intervention. All right. So then, of course, there is state-backed capitalism where businesses, banks, and government work together towards the Chinese national strategic goals, right? And then there is...
Hang on, so banks are more effective than tanks in some ways.
Definitely, that's how the entire Western world is being controlled, in it. That's how the financial system is controlling the entire world, in it. That is how we were discussing, but that will become theology. The Antichrist, maybe in another program, we'll discuss it. That how the Antichrist as a system is is got a hold. There's a global hold through the banking system. So the Chinese understood that. So their banks are state operated, and they have got state-backed capitalism working for them. And that gives them the incremental influence. China often advances quietly, economically first, then politically and strategically. For example, in Sri Lanka, they gave them billions of dollars of loan, and they created a port for them. All right, a strategic port, which is now a thorn in the Indian feet. And they gave these huge loans to Sri Lankan government who could not pay them back, and the Chinese, I believe, knew that they won't be able to pay them back. So they took control of the Sri Lankan port. All right. So basically, the Belt and Road Initiative is based on overland route and maritime route. So the maritime route of Colombo is under the Chinese ownership now. The same thing happened to Pakistan. They gave loans to Pakistan. They keep on giving loans to Pakistan, and they made the port of Gwadar, but Pakistanis cannot pay them the loans back because the Pakistani economies are in shambles. Only man who was doing something for the economy, and the economy was growing at 6% GDP growth, was Imran Khan, and he was thrown into prison by the American interference we have already discussed, and the Chinese stayed quiet because it worked for them. They want the Americans and the Pakistani militaries to keep on making the mistakes which they're making, because eventually they'll go back to China asking for a bailout. And once the countries the Chinese invest in goes back to Beijing to ask for a bailout, they said, all right, listen, forget about the bailout. We've invested in this project. lease this project to us for another 50 to 100 years. And that's how they are, in fact, making new colonies with the consent of the host nations. And they're based on businesses, and they're based on little satellites, which is earning them revenue. And that is their model of expansion. And unfortunately, the way President Trump has acted has made the Chinese still look a viable partner, business partner for even Europe. Just imagine that.
This is fascinating for me to sort of think this, the British and the Chinese using a similar sort of model. You can even go back to 1500 BC and see a similar model being adopted by the Lebanese Phoenicians, Carthaginians, their empire, up and down the east coast of the Atlantic Ocean. They would take over islands. So, for example, the island of Holyhead in Wales, right up as far as places like Norway, etc. They would take over islands. They would garrison them. They would fortify them. They would then use them as a point of trade, and slowly but surely infiltrate. So this is nothing new about much of this. But look, you said something very interesting there about a sort of elite in China that Xi is from. I think most people don't know that there is this sort of, particularly the left wing. Think of this communist style government as egalitarian, but it isn't it? It's kept this kind of Mandarin class from even centuries ago. Certainly China was always ruled by these Mandarin class, and you're saying that the same thing still exists today. What evidence have you got for that?
I mean, it's very easy to research the Communist Party, which is ruling China, and it is a fact. And within the Communist Party, there is a top hierarchy, and these people who are controlling, who made the Communist Party, their own children were groomed to become members and officials of the Communist Party, and they were given easy. Nepotism does played a role there. In the subcontinent of India and Pakistan, we call these people the Nepo babies, all right? The nepotism babies, right? So short for nepotism, we call them the Nepo babies. So Xi's father was a senior Communist official, a Communist Party official, and one of the top ranking officers. And their children were the Nepo babies, the princelings. And they were groomed for this role to rise at the top and then take over control of China. Now there is a hierarchy as well, and there is a merit-based system as well. Like in Pakistan, the military controls the governance, and the system is there, obviously. But the Chinese thinking, I believe, is that if these people who are have-nots become rich and become powerful, well, they can be easily manipulated. So under President Xi Jinping, there have been accountability drives in which even Chinese generals and top-ranking officials have been killed because of corruption, and they even make the corrupt people, pay for the bullet which would be used to kill them. Their own families are made to pay for that as well. So there have been purges, there have been accountability, but that has been selective accountability, and there have been articles written about it. If you can just do your basic research, and you'll find that the accountability was directed at not the princelings, not the elite, at the lot, which actually, they were corrupt. There's no question about that. But these people, they came from a class who were, let's say, self-made, or from the lower middle class. They grew up to be middle class, and they joined the upper class in a period of time, and then they got manipulated into making more money. And the rich are also doing the so-called princeling are also doing the same thing, but they get they dodge the bullet most of the time. And it has been noted in China, where there is no open press and open media, but obviously there are people and observers who note these things and they report these things. And that is how President Xi has become an emperor, and he's got unlimited reign for himself, and that is how he's controlling the country. But the main question, Tony, is that the system is working for the people. So that is why they don't complain. But then again, another question, the counter question is that if it is really working that well for the Chinese, then how come they come on visit visas to the UK and they work in the nail parlors, for example, and in massage parlors, for example, and they can't even speak English, and quite regularly I'll find my wife going to these nail parlors and they're always filled. There'll be dozens of chairs all across the UK, not even in London, all across the UK, and you'll hardly find them empty. Then they're always all and the ladies working there, they can't speak English, but they're obviously there. Then I believe on the work on the visit visas which have been given for the to wealthy Chinese who come and spend a lot of money to the Chinese middle class come and spend a lot of money to London, and that is there obviously. So they're as a result of this visa policy, there have been good business coming in, but the Chinese people are also manipulating that kind of and they become labor over here. And these nail parlor ladies would say that if they're frank enough, they'll tell you that they're making a lot of money compared to China if they work here for 6 months. And they can stay for 6 months over here, and they're not working with any. I mean, they're the real immigrants who Tony Robinson should be marching against. But if they work here for 6 months, they can live off that money for 3 years in China, because the cost of life in China is very cheap. You know that, Tony, don't you?
Yeah. Well, look, the thing is that the Chinese have been very good at putting across this idea that they live in this egalitarian society. Where there is workers' power, etc. And yet, it's just like the United States in a way. It's just a small elite a tiny elite of families, and it's just a bit of difference as to whether the justice system in these various empires is actually working, and it clearly isn't, because those who are in these elites, it seems to me, may actually be above the law.
Well, if the justice system is working, how come the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang have faced the kind of repression which they have faced, and nobody really talks about them? And if somebody does really talk about them, they're censored, because the Chinese have got huge investments now in media and free press as well. So, I mean, that is one of the business they're running successfully. I think after Rupert Murdoch, if somebody is really media giant in this modern mainstream media, or what Elon Musk would like to call the legacy media, those are the Chinese. They are controlling the media. So they do not want to run the story, but it is a true story. Talk about the second child policy, one child policy. Well, the second childs were killed, you know that, and they were poisoned and they were killed. So that is all against human rights. They don't care about human rights. They don't want to talk about it. Fine. And the billionaires, the anti-fascist, they want to implement a Chinese model in the world, because they think that it's a successful model. They want to turn the whole world into a factory and the people of the world into factory workers. Well, do you really believe that is the way, that is the way to live?
Okay, look, here is the final question, right, which has got to be, which of these two empires do you think is the best, and which is going to win? You've got an American empire, which is run by this maniacal, it's a dying empire, maniacal system, which puts people like Trump in power who don't really know what they're doing. He's an extremely narcissistic guy. He's trusting his advisors. He's just making up his foreign policy based on what he sees on CNN. No, actually, it's Fox, isn't it? Fox News. Or the alternative is this amazing egalitarian China, where President Xi is not just an emperor. He's more. He's like the Pope. You know, everything he says has got to be true, and if you say it isn't, you're in serious trouble. I mean, he's put himself up as almost like a man god in charge. Well, Trump hasn't quite gone that far, although he did a picture of himself as Jesus. But which of these two empires is going to win, do you think, in this global struggle?
Well, Tony, materially speaking, the American infrastructure is failing. American-led Western infrastructure is also failing. The people are suffering. The people are suffering because they have shifted their production to China ages ago, because they allowed the capitalists to rule them, and the capitalists are only there for money, and the banks only wants to make money, and they're making good money doing business with the Chinese, and the Chinese know this, and Chinese are facilitating them. And so that is why all the gold and glitter is there in China. So materially speaking, yes, the Chinese are definitely up and coming empire, and they are succeeding in attracting the global elite and the global businesses and the various nation states to in partnership to do business with them. And then the model is trade first, which is happening right now, influence second, and control last. That is there, fine. But humans are not only materially motivated, and that has been something which is all there's been always the ultimate battle of good and evil. The basis of that battle has always been that the humankind not only the motivation is not only money. Of course, we are made to believe that money is, everything, and that is what the modern world represents to us. But if money is really everything, then how come the empires which rise ultimately fall? How come the money could not save them? Of course, it is being plundered. It gets plundered. Of course, there are then circumstances in which people they migrate from these empires. At the end of the day, freedom, human rights have been the bedrock of the Western civilization, or the Western influence civilization. And the humankind, if they feel protected, if their rights are protected, and if they've got the expression, if they're allowed to, express themselves, then they invent. And it is the Western invention which is still leading actually in the post AI revolution. The US is talking about and the US led West is talking about the post AI revolution, right? And the post AI revolution is based on invention, and the invention, well, in the research and development invention field, the Western world is still leading. Why? Because the human brain is not captured through authoritarian dictations. So ultimately, the humankind flourish where they are allowed certain freedoms which are not there in which are not there in China. Well, China at best as manufacturing in mass. And they are investing a lot of energy in research and development, but mind you, they still have to copy a lot of technologies from the Western world, because the development leadership is in the Western world, in Europe and in the US. Why? Because why did all these people like Einstein and all the leading people are getting the Nobel prizes for inventions are based in US or Europe, because they find that they can live freely, and they've got the right to live freely in this world, in the Western world. So ultimately,
there's also this thing of freedom of conscience. The concept that your country really is only any good if people can express themselves and believe what they want to believe, so long as they're not harming anybody else. So this seems to me the reason why China is a bit of a paper tiger in a way, is that they've been very successful in training their population to follow money, to make the decisions based on money, and not necessarily on morals. The morals are falling away. The money is becoming the big decision. Inside your mind, when you're thinking, should I do this or should I do that? You're also thinking with pound signs or yuan signs. But I don't think that kind of empire can ever really succeed. You're right. Ultimately, I'd love to hear from you which way you think. I mean, I know I said this is the final question, but which way is Pakistan going? Because it almost seems like it's a crossroads in Pakistan between the Chinese elites and the American elites. They're playing around at the top with the Pakistanis, and we're seeing this war settle out. Or at least the conflict settle out. So India being allied very much with the Israelis and the United States, but Pakistan more with China through trade. So what is the future for your country in all of this, do you think, Adil? What do you think?
Well, Tony, Pakistan wants to play all sides, and it really works for countries who are playing all sides. The Pakistani military establishment which is controlling the country has traditionally been hosting the international rivalries and been the playground for superpowers ever since its existence. Firstly, it was the USSR and the USA, and now they are modeling themselves to become a playground or the war zone for the rivalry between China and USA. And to some extent, they have been successful in doing that, but ultimately, the people of Pakistan will suffer because of this great power rivalry. And it has been suffering before because of the Cold War, the first Cold War between USSR and the USA. The people of Pakistan paid the price, as I've already mentioned, through the Kalashnikov and heroin culture. And now the people of Pakistan will pay the price by becoming, we joke around amongst ourselves in Pakistan. Well, the Chinese are coming in. They're bringing in their own manpower. They're bringing in their own, even, the labor are the Chinese prisoners from the Chinese, prisons. They come and work on the Chinese infrastructure project in Pakistan. And then the Chinese engineers and the Chinese, even bankers, they're coming in, and the Chinese projects are run by the Chinese themselves. The Pakistanis are only there to serve the Chinese food and tea, and at best, change the tires of their vehicles which are running on the Pakistani roads. So ultimately, Pakistani population and Pakistani people of Pakistan will be the ultimate sufferers of this great power rivalry. But the Pakistani elite do not care for that, because the country Pakistan was made for the elite, they believe, and the elite are the one who are actually benefiting for the system, and that is why they're scared of the people's leader. May it be Zulfikar Ali Bhutto or may it be Imran Khan, now the people's leader. They're afraid of him. And the irony is that not only the Chinese, not only the Pakistani military establishment, but even the Americans are scared of Imran Khan, and they don't want democracy to flourish in Pakistan because they're looking after their own interest. Fine, but why is the Pakistani military not looking after Pakistan's interest? So that is the million-dollar question. And the answer is because they're looking after their personal interests. And the countries cannot survive like this, Tony. Pakistan has already broken into two in 1971, and they're heading towards that direction, God forbid. And we don't want that to happen for Pakistan, but that is the direction they're heading towards, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, it's a very dangerous game that they're playing, they think they're trying to play off the Americans against the Chinese, where actually the Chinese and the Americans are playing them. Anyway, Adil Raja, thanks very much for joining us. And maybe you could just round up with letting viewers know and listeners know whereabouts people can find you online and follow you, and whereabouts, how regularly you do podcasts, vodcasts, or whatever you call them.
Well, actually, I'm quite regular in doing my short vlogs, but they're mostly in Urdu. But you've got an option of find the captions in English, and that is at Soldier Speaks Reloaded, at Soldier Speaks Reloaded on YouTube, and on Soldier Speaks English if you want to watch my English vlogs. And you can find me on X at Soldier Speaks, and my website is soldierspeaks.org. soldierspeaks.org, and you're going to find all my socials, all my video. If you go to my website soldierspeaks.org, you'll find all my articles as well, and I regularly publish them. And I've got a team of very renowned people like Tony Gosling working with me, and I'm very fortunate like that. So you'll find all of that on soldierspeaks.org and on my socials.
Lovely. Okay, Adil Raja, thanks very much for joining us once more. And let's see what happens with the Philippines too. Very interesting things going on there. A similar, actually, between China, a tug of war going on between China and America, all over Asia. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so very much.